This week on Literary Posthumanisms, we have a case study on Octavia E. Butler. What we'll be doing in this lesson is to locate certain themes of posthumanism that recur in some of Butler's texts. So before we locate them, a brief intro to Butler herself. Octavia E. Butler was born in 1947 in Pasadena, California. She started writing at a young age, and in 1995 she became the first sci-fi writer to win the MacArthur Grant, also known as the Genius Grant. She is a sci-fi writer, so her characters include a lot of extraterrestrial beings as well as humans, and the encounters between humans and non-human life forms form a major part of of the plot of most of her stories. So here I'll be mainly relying on two of her texts. I've used a couple other texts as well, used certain excerpts from a couple other texts as well. But the two main texts I've used are Dawn and Survivor. Dawn was published in 1987, and Survivor was published in the 1970s. Dawn belongs to Butler's Xenogenesis trilogy, later known as Lilith's Brood. So what happens in Dawn is that the protagonist, named Lilith Yapo, she meets she not just meets, she's rescued from the Earth along with a lot of other human beings as well, from a nuclear war on the Earth, which is human induced. So basically, in all of Butler's fiction, almost all of Butler's fiction, the world is amok. The Earth has been destroyed by humans, and the human beings, some of them are rescued by extraterrestrial beings or the monster or the other, however you may choose to call them. So they've been rescued, and Lilith wakes up on an Oyankali ship. So the extraterrestrial beings are called the Oyankalis, and Lilith wake up on one of their ships, and she realizes that she is now under their control. So what happens next? She can either run away, or she cannot run away exactly. She can choose to die, or she can say yes to initiating contact with the Oyankali and starting a life of her own with them. So of course she chooses the latter, and she helps other human beings as well to acclimatize themselves to the Oyankali. So that is a very brief intro to what happens in the first book of the trilogy. I've only used certain instances from the text where Lilith meets the Oyankali for the first time, and they start learning about each other. The second text I've used is Survivor. Survivor was published in the 1970s, 1977, I think. And in Survivor, what happens is that the protagonist, named Alana, she also has fled from the Earth along with her foster family. She reaches another planet, and there she meets the humans there meet two warring tribes known as the Tekon and the Garkon, and Alana then becomes a mediary, an emissary of the humans to the Tekon and the Garkon, and she initiates a relationship between them, which comes at a price, of course. So that is a very basic introduction to two of the main texts I've used. So without further ado, into the into the texts themselves and the excerpts I've used. So the first theme I've located is from the monster to the post-human. So what happens is that I've located a number of excerpts here where the monster or the other is described and how the other appears to the human at the first glance. So if you look at slide 3, you can see that Lilith is meeting the Oinkali for the first time, and she is, of course, thrown away by how unhuman-like they are. But then, the first thing she asks them is, "I don't mean any offense, but are you male or female?" And then the person whom she is asking to replies, "It's wrong to assume that I must be a sex you're familiar with, but as it happens, I am male." So once Lilith realizes that this creature she's talking to is male, she becomes it becomes easier for her to talk to it, and she says he right after that. He looked remarkably human now. Was it only the tentacles that gave him that sea-slug appearance? His coloring hadn't changed. The fact that he had no eyes, nose or ears still disturbed her, but not as much. So soon she compares the new body that she has seen to bodies that she's familiar with. For example, she compares the Oinkali body to that of a sea slug, and at some point she says the smooth flesh is not as smooth, but it's almost as smooth as fingernails were, and perhaps as tough as a fingernail. She starts comparing it to human body parts as well. So what happens here is that in this preliminary encounter with the monster, the human relies a lot on physical appearances. So once this physical appearance is set, once the body, once the human being, Lilith here, can see some, at least a couple of similarities, very subtle similarities perhaps, but at least a couple of similarities between the human body and the body of the other. What happens is that it is easier to interact with them. Right? So what is the sex or the gender? What does the body look like? Does it resemble something on earth? Yes, a sea slug or some other animals. Then it is easier to sort of fit it within the human imagination. So the appearance is perceived to be human-like. So the same happens in Survivor as well. One of the Khon tribes in Survivor is described as a furry caricature, human caricature, a furred human caricature, I think is the word used. Strangely colored furred caricatures of human beings. So what happens here is once the monster finds a way in to fit within the human imagination, and once that step happens, in the first encounter, the monster finds a way to fit within the human imagination. So once that is done, that is over with, it is easier to accommodate once the physical nature of the monster or the unknown can be compared to something at least slightly human-like or slightly known to human beings. So that is the first step towards the birth of the post-human. First encounter happens, and during the encounter, the human beings look for ways to fit the monster within the human imagination. And once that monster is sort of accommodated into the human brain and can be compared to something known, it is easier to facilitate communication. The second theme is re-educating the human. So once that is done, the primary encounter is over with. The second step is re-education. So what happens next is learning about each other. So these are very two different species that we are talking about. The human species with their own set of cultural norms, societal norms, etc., and another species with very different set of um, differences in every aspect you look for in their economy, in their society, in their culture, in their language. Everything will be different. So what has to happen next is a process of teaching each other in how to embrace difference towards an almost erasure of differences, teaching each other and across species as an important step in living as companions. So, in the next step, the third step will be we'll be looking at how companionships and partnerships are formed between the human and the other. So, a major facet of that creation of the partnership is teaching each other their own culture specific mores and traditions and values. Uh, so Lilith, for example, is asked to teach the rest of the human beings the Oyankali ways of living and sort of help them ease their process of um, accommodating themselves within the Oyankali society. Similarly, Alana is taught the ways of the alien tribe that she meets on a faraway planet, and both Alana and Lilith teach themselves, teach the alien species as well as the rest of the human beings ways of fitting in, ways of finding similarities between the two species and fitting in with as little friction as possible. Becoming so then what is becoming post-human means? I'm using Rosie Bradotti here, who says becoming posthuman is a process of redefining one's sense of attachment and connection to a shared world. So, this shared world part is very important here because what we're looking at is how the human and the other can form sustainable multi-species living, multi-species communities. So, the shared world part is very important. So, once the human other encounter starts, they teach each other uh, ways of fitting in their differences, their similarities, and they look towards forming feasible companionships. Right. But in all of Atlas fiction, there is a caveat to this because mm, there is something called biological addiction, which aids the human beings into such relationships. For example, um, there's a text called Fledgling of Butler, which is a vampire fantasy novel. Butler calls it a vampire fantasy novel. So, what happens in Fledgling is that the vampires in Fledgling addict the human beings to venom in their blood. So, like the vampires of myths and fairy tales, the vampires here also drink blood of human beings, and once they drink the blood of human beings a couple of times, the human beings become addicted to their vampires, and the vampires vice versa. And what is established is a relationship that is very symbiotic, and the human beings are called symbionts. In relation, in exchange for the blood of the human beings, the vampires um, give them long life, longevity. They look much younger than their age, etc. So, same goes for the Oyankali as well, who addict the human beings to, um, who sort of tamper with the brain chemistry of the human beings and addicting the human beings to their partner Oyankalis. So, these are forced, right? These are not biological, these are biological, but these are not voluntary, right? These are forced affiliations. So these forced affiliations can also be seen as a step towards the birth of the post-human. So then what does being partners mean within such relationships? Is this how the post-humans take control? So biological addiction is a very tricky part in Butler's fiction in the sense that human agency is almost inconceivable in such instances where the humans are they are said to be partners, they're said to be companions with their non-human counterparts, but at the end of the day, the other exercise power over their human partners. So, what does partners mean within such relationships is something to also think about. Right. Yes. Now, posthumanism as partnership is the next theme. This is what one of the Oyankali tells Lilith. Trade means change. Bodies change. Ways of living must change. Did you think your children would only look different? She had to risk bargaining, try to gain something, and her only currency was cooperation. So, trade is something important here because the Oyankali say that they trade genetic material. They trade parts of their body with parts of their partners in order to create hybrids. Right. So they live by trading genes and genetic material. So bodies change, trade means change, ways of living must change. Partnership. So we're talking about partnership here. So there are partners involved in this exchange, in this contract, in this bargain. Mm, so the future is conceived with two partners, the human and the non-human, in the form of a contract where they live and evolve alongside each other. But it is also to be remembered that this partnership involves both loss and gain. So certain parts of the body you get to keep, but certain other parts will be controlled by the non-human partners. So once the post-humans are born, the hybrids are born, they'll be born with the best features of their parents, of their partner species. It is to be remembered that competition is always rejected in favor of cooperation, as Pramod K. Nair points out in his reading of Fledgling. Competition rejected in favor of cooperation. So what we're looking at is a very symbiotic, symbiogenetic way of living that Butler very much favors favors in all of her texts. So in slide 12, I've used an extract from Butler's Parable of the Talents, where she says any entity, any process that cannot or should not be resisted or avoided must somehow be partnered. So we're talking about partnerships and how partnerships are very much important to the creation of posthumans. Right. Okay. Now that this is all done, we have the human is redefining the human. So what becomes of the human? To think beyond the confines of the human body and to shape one's self accordingly. The posthuman opens up new ways of thinking about what being human means. Being human then means living alongside other forms of life, giving birth to new forms of life, um, and to shape one's beliefs and one's self accordingly. This is an excerpt from Parable of the Talents again. Self is body and bodily perception. Self is thought, memory, belief. Self creates, self destroys, self learns, discovers, becomes. Self shapes, self adapts, self invents its own reasons for being. So, what happens to the self? The body, of course, change, ways of living change, and now the self also has to change. The self has to learn of new ways of living as well as to adapt oneself to something beyond uh, human imagination, of course, and also beyond um, anything non anything hitherto known to human beings, and to think of mutually evolving and existing with other forms of life, which is what posthumanism is all about. So, just to briefly recap, we talked about how the monster and the and the human, monster and the human, mm, meet for the first time, monster human encounters, how they teach each other their cultural values, mores about their society, economy, etc., how to embrace differences, how biological addiction is a part and parcel of these interactions, how posthumanism then becomes sort of a partnership where multi species communities are formed via these interactions. And finally, how the human is redefined, new ways of looking at the human through these adaptations and ways of living. Yes, so that's about it. Thank you.